Hey, good morning, everybody. I'm Sam Solomon, the host of Signal Tower, and today I have the pleasure of being joined by Submittable CEO Michael Fitzgerald. Submittable is a submission management platform with clients such as Playboy and CBS. Michael's an entrepreneur, developer, author, and really just an all-around fascinating person. Today we'll talk about his experience publishing his first book, Radiant Days. We'll talk about looking for startup ideas in unsexy industries and the importance of perseverance. Or as Michael says, just shut up and keep your butt in the chair. Also, if you're a founder, developer, or writer, go ahead and subscribe to Signal Tower at signaltower.co. I'll work on bringing you interviews with fascinating people each week. Okay, let's get started. Michael, welcome to the show.
Oh, thanks for having me, Sam.
Yeah, so I guess to begin the show, could you tell us a bit about yourself?
Sure. So I live in Missoula, Montana, and our company was founded and based here. And I've been here, seems to have gone by quickly, but I've been here for about 15 years. And prior to that, I lived in Eastern Europe during the 90s and lived in New York, lived in San Francisco during the dot-com stuff, the late 90s. That's about it.
All right.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about your book. Your first novel was Radiant Days. Could you tell us kind of a little bit about that book and then why you decided to write it?
Yeah. So I grew up always wanting to be an author. I read pretty constantly, and I think it was a fairly typical first book, sort of mildly autobiographical. A little bit more sex and drugs than real life, and but I lived in Budapest in Croatia in the early 90s, and the book unbelievably takes place in Budapest in Croatia in the early 90s. And it was very influenced by, again, sort of the parade of young male wannabe, or people we want to be, sort of Hemingway, Fitzgerald, and that kind of thing. But it was an amazing experience writing it, and sort of a mildly horrific experience getting it published. But it also, one of the things that you do on any big project is you're mostly learning how to do it better the next time. And I love the experience of learning how to write a book.
You said that it was a horrific experience to, try and publish it. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Well, it's just a very, very different muscle. I think this is a thing that most authors don't really fully understand, or artists in general, is, you make the thing by yourself in your basement in front of your computer, and it's just you. And once you make it, you have to promote it and you have to sell it, and that's a wildly different muscle. You have to be sort of self-serving and get it out there. Not saying that successful authors are self-serving, but just getting the book out there, selling it is a wildly different thing than writing it. It's a fairly undignified, awful process. I mean, some people do it incredibly well.
Well, and how do you make it through those tough times? Like what drive do you have?
Well, you've just done all this hard work, right? So I know most people might be faster than myself, but my first book took on and off for five or 6 years. And during that time I was married. So I was sucking up, 2 or 3 hours of the day from my wife. And I had kids from my real work. I had a day job, and my head wasn't always in it. So you kind of owe it to, once you do finish a book and you feel like it's something that a stranger might actually engage in and enjoy. For me, I maybe this is Catholicism, but I just felt guilty. I felt like I owed it to my family to now make it a success.
Right.
And humiliation. The other thing is you've gone around for the last 5 years telling all these people that you're writing a book, and that's in a very probably sophomoric way, very motivating. you tell enough people, you want to actually go do the thing, right?
Motivated kind of by fear of failure.
Just humiliation. You can't, like you tell 100 people that you're writing a book. It's, I think I've said this before in other interviews, that you like the cocktail conversation. You go out to dinner parties, or you go to a bar, and you are hanging out with your friends. They all sort of over the course of a couple of years realize that you do this thing every morning. You're writing, and in the beginning they're kind of like excited for you. Oh, that's so great. Oh, we're so excited. It's very much like starting a company. We're so excited to see this company. And then, you go into the valley of death, where you actually are just writing for 3 years, and it's not that exciting. It's just you typing, right? So at that point they're just embarrassed for you, and now it's setting in that might actually not happen, and that's, for me, that was just motivating to make it happen.
What do you think makes a great writer?
Oh, I mean, different people enjoy different kinds of writing. Like my wife's also a writer, and she enjoys, very different books. And I think in her mind, things that are great, we do agree on a couple great authors. But for me, what I like are just people who cannot they can't help but say the most truthful fucking things on earth, right? And it's just, they're not, they can write prose that isn't cluttered down by sort of pretense or style. It's just they can say things that are just utterly direct and utterly true, and it somehow moves you. It somehow you can't get that kind of information or that kind of feeling from anywhere else on earth yet. I haven't figured it out, but there are certain books that just it feels like a voice from the cloud as you're reading the words on the page. It's just so fucking true, right?
Right.
Even fiction, most, the best fiction is sort of truer than nonfiction.
Yeah, I think that when Jason Fried talks about writing, he always says design starts with writing, but it is almost all of their writing is the clearest, the most concise way. There's no kind of legalese or journalese kind of involved. It's just say what you mean and say it with a honesty.
Yeah, it's just here's my heart.
Yeah, here it is. Take it.
Yeah, I think also writing is a way of thinking. It's this. It's both. It's the only, art in general is the only way of both combining thought and feeling in sort of a single object, and I think it's important in all kinds of things. Design. I personally can't really think straight unless I've written for about an hour every morning.
I'm exactly the same way. If you can write clearly, it helps you organize your thoughts. I think I've actually got a blog post sitting on my computer or somewhere on the internet, kind of talking about clear writing is clear thinking. I mean, for me, that's what it does. If I really want to to be able to explain something to someone, I feel like I need to write about it first.
I also think it gives you the opportunity to sort of think about what has happened during the course of the day. We just kind of cruise through life, and if you just, some people use prayer, some people do meditation, but for me, sitting down on a blank piece of paper and just sort of plucking something from the previous day and trying to make it an artifact or actualize it in some way is, it just makes me feel better, and it makes me feel that I'm doing something in the world that isn't just about paying, buying food for my kids or putting a house on, a roof on the house or something. It's kind of corny, but whatever.
Do you keep a journal?
I used to, and I used to not just journal, but I used to just constantly write crap down. I would steal conversations, I would steal thoughts, I would steal people. Anytime I saw something that I liked, I would copy it. I don't do that so much anymore, but I do have about 5,000 basically open Google Docs that are different pieces of different things that, I'm constantly adding to and cutting and pasting from.
Do you ever plan on doing anything with those?
Yeah, so I have this book. This circles back because I'm now going to tell you, so now I have to do it. So I have this book, and I've told a bunch of people. So I have this book called Start Down, which is sort of a nonfiction book about this process, about starting a technical company with thousands of customers and large customers in the middle of a fairly rural place. And just sort of how we stumbled our way through the first few years and how we got it to wherever it will eventually be.
So I guess, because you guys are you're not obviously in Silicon Valley, you're in Montana. Can you give us kind of a peek into, some of those essays? What is it like to start a company outside of Silicon Valley?
Well, so I don't know what it's like to start one in Silicon Valley. So we did go to YC and we did move there.
That's right.
We were there for about 4 months, and I had lived in San Francisco for a number of years in the late '90s. So all that wasn't completely foreign to me, but the main difference is there's no noise. There's no, like, you don't constantly feel like you're not, you're missing some meeting with some investor. Like, you don't. When I was there, I just felt like I was supposed to always be meeting somebody bigger and more powerful than us. And I felt like there was just all these developers that I was supposed to be impressed by and this kind of thing. And they were incredibly powerful and important people and fucking brilliant people and insane developers. But here, like, that equation is completely gone. Like, the only thing we think about are customers. The only thing that, like, we care about is customers and employees, like paying the bills and making something that people use. And we're so outside of the echo chamber of, like, how much money you've raised or how, who's going to buy you and all that stuff, that it just doesn't take up an ounce of our energy. And for me, that feels good. When we were there, I felt like I was thinking about things that weren't crucial, absolutely essential to the business. I was thinking of it like the voodoo that is Silicon Valley. For us, that feels right to be here. There's also, Montana does have some things that are fairly entrepreneurial, like it is a frontier of sorts, and the people who live here, there's no Google, there's no massive corporations that are hiring people. So anybody who actually, like, has a mortgage or who lives here is, whether they know it or not, is probably doing something fairly entrepreneurial, because they are sort of living outside the cushion of the corporate world.
Right.
So I find these people who hustle. They hustle. They'll have like 5 jobs and they're totally involved in everything, especially in Missoula. Like, everybody shows up at city council meetings. Like, people are just, like, in the thick of it constantly. The only difference is they aren't, like, trying to make $1 billion company, but they're doing all the work that in my mind takes to, like, go scale and build something huge. And they also are living on the edge, which is what most startups are. You're just living without any real safety net. And I think that living here has been very valuable in that. Like, we didn't even think twice about quitting our job. It was like, oh yeah, like, we'll just be starving and crazy for 4 months. So I think Montana's great because it's got like a native entrepreneurialism. It's completely outside of any bubble, or there's just none of that noise here. We don't care who our advisors are. We're just, all we care about is customers, and I think that's really valuable for us. And people answer phone calls from 406. So when I cold call, like, CEOs at major publishing companies, they answer the call because they're all like, who's calling me from Montana?
Right? A little bit of a competitive advantage there.
I think it's really worked for us. And we do customer support all day, and people are so psyched when they hear, oh my God, you're in Montana. And as soon as you say that, I mean, a lot of people have driven through. It just chills people out, and they just think they think everything's gonna be all right. They just trust you if you're living in Montana. I don't know,
So
maybe.
so it's kind of like, you feel like you're able to better focus outside of the valley.
I think for me personally, I think I do. Yeah.
I almost feel guilty using the term meetup because that's not really the only thing I know how to describe it. But are there any types of, I guess, entrepreneurial gatherings or things like that? How do you meet other
Sure.
entrepreneurs?
Yeah, there is. So in Bozeman, which is another city in Missoula, and I mean in Montana, and Montana is really sort of the whole state's kind of a small village. Like we all know each other. I'm literally like two phone calls away from the governor and senators, and even though I'm nobody, but it's amazing like that. You really like if I wanted to get the governor's ear, I don't know what it would get me right now, but if I wanted to, I could. And so we all sort of know each other. Literally, I know if I drive into Bozeman right now, my car broke down, I could get a stranger who could help me, and we would probably have a mutual, someone in common. So Bozeman had an event. They had this thing, Right Now Technologies, which was bought by Oracle for $1.8 billion. And that was one of the first software as a service customer support systems. And it, it was a success, and it made it seem possible, right? So you have this company that grows in Yourstown, has an amazing exit, $1.8 billion. It was so big. There's a story that when the Bozeman Chronicle reported on it, they said local software company sells for $1.8 million because it just seemed inconceivable that something would sell for $1.8 billion in Montana, or a tech company, right? But what they did was pretty amazing. Like, so they kind of cracked the ice in Bozeman, and they made it seem possible, and that inspired a lot of people. And plus, there was suddenly a bunch of fairly wealthy individuals who could then go and start their own companies. In Missoula, there have been similar stories, not to quite like that large, but my original the original investors in Missoula in Submittable, and sort of the people even to this day who are my go-to people whenever like it's just when it just sucks. They're two entrepreneurs. They built a company without any investment. They owned it outright, and they sold it to Quest, which was a subsidy of Dell, for $18 million. No shareholders. They sold it for cash, and they just seem like freaks. They seem like regular people. And meeting them and being able to interface with them, their names are Glenn Kreisel and Steve Seroff, in the very beginning was, just essential for us. Like and having access to people who did it on their own in the middle of nowhere was sort of, they showed us the roadmap. They showed it could be done. That was crucial. So there are, and they also inspired a bunch of other people. So I'm saying both these companies started 10 years ago, sold 5 years ago. But since then, there's just been sort of these small little pods of people trying to make things happen. And I think Missoula this year was, so what's that foundation, the Kauffman Foundation?
Right.
Missoula was number 10 on venture capital per capita.
Wow.
So we have a fairly robust startup scene in Missoula, Montana, and everyone's just walking around town. You do not feel it, but we all know each other. We all can call each other. When I started Submittable, I would go out for drinks once a month with one of the founders of Rivertop, which is a green chemical company, and just sort of like talk each other through, like, this is, the conversation was like, this isn't totally idiotic, right? Yeah. Okay.
I'm not crazy.
Okay. But like in the beginning, you are a little crazy. It's because it's a crazy thing to do when I think back on it.
Yeah, I mean, and it to me it seems kind of like all, you know, I guess entrepreneurship is a little bit, um, it comes and goes in cycles. My mentor Don Bora talked about in Chicago. What really started the Chicago tech scene was Groupon. That was like the really big hit. All of a sudden, there was a huge amount of money in Chicago. I've also know I talk about this all the time, but in Atlanta, David Cummings, who sold Pardot. I mean, a year ago, Atlanta's tech scene really wasn't doing anything, and now it's ballooning. And kind of it takes one big sale, one
Right.
big exit, and it kind of has these. If the entrepreneurs go back and invest in the community, it has this effect. Um,
That's exactly right. And I feel like that's happening right now. I think, Bozeman's already a little ahead of us, but I think Missoula, I like, it just feel like it's just this feeling I get when I go to the meetups, when I go, they have things pretty regularly. Um, and, I'm a little freaked out by the startup culture. It's exactly why I didn't love Silicon Valley. Like, just not always a lot getting done.
right, a lot of talking.
A lot of talking and a lot of like reiterating whatever the lean startup book and all that stuff. But but it is just exciting to see like two 18-year-olds like trying to do something, and it's exciting.
I've got a couple more questions kind of about writing before we go and talk a little bit more about Submittable. You mentioned that you had a horrific experience trying to publish a book, and you also mentioned that you're working on another book. Are you going to go back through the publishing process, or are you thinking about self-publishing it?
Yeah. I don't think I'll self-publish it because that seems to me, it wasn't the part that I found uncomfortable was the self-promotion, which is where you're literally just trying to, first you're just trying to sell it to an agent. Then you're just trying to sell it to an editor. Then it's very much, there's a lot in common with starting a company, with writing a book, which I can go into particular later. But then once it's out there, you've got this book that's fairly autobiographical, and you're supposed to go and read in front of people, and you just feel like you're walking around with your skin ripped off. And I think in my mind, self-publishing is that from like day one. Like you're just completely just walking around with like naked, holding this book up in front of people who don't give a shit. And I think that, I think New York publishing right now is a little, obviously they have problems because their legacy model, it's like any big business, it's built on a model that doesn't truly work anymore. On the other hand, I think editorial is more valuable than ever, right? I think it's a wildly underestimated skill set. I think publicity, done well, is a wildly underestimated skill set. And I think that's what I was saying in the beginning, that like writing a book is you just sitting there by yourself and typing. Publishing or editing and publishing and creating a beautiful object. Those are all parts of the process that I find very valuable. And so self-publishing to me, I know you can pay people for all that stuff, and but I think I don't think I'm there yet. I think self-publishing. I think I would try traditional publishing. I love editors. I mean our business is based on editors are the majority of our clients. And now that there's so much content, I just you see typos on like Pando, like I love Pando and TechCrunch, but there's typos every single, like every article.
Right.
And the whole internet, the urge to like get it out as fast as possible. I completely understand it, but it sort of makes writing something different than it was. I think there's a lot of value in like an amazing sentence. Yeah.
It's definitely interesting. I feel like a lot of it, and as someone, originally Signal Tower, as I told you earlier, started kind of as like a news, kind of a tech and design and education news blog. I mean, unfortunately, kind of the way the internet works, the way that search engines work, you're really rewarded more for just creating content and creating as much of it as you can.
Links back to it.
I mean, and with that, you're like you said, curation. is really important because, with that, you really just get a lot of stuff that's really not that great. You get a lot of low quality stuff, which is also kind of interesting. I don't know what that says kind of about the publishing industry. So maybe, I don't know, I'm speculating that maybe there's another business model there. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't think anybody really knows, but I do think, there's one, I think that the fact that the cost of production is dramatically lowered, is valuable. But I think micropayments will help. I think Amazon getting out of the way will help. There's still a bunch of middlemen that aren't necessary. And I think when it shakes out in probably 2 or 3 years, publishing, as the traditional publishing of someone sitting in their basement writing an amazing novel, that model will still exist.
Do you think Amazon's going to get out of the way?
Well, if you think about it, so right now, like the amazing thing they had was a distribution. Like the first thing they focused on was they did something incredibly difficult, right? Which was the distribution of random stuff.
Right.
Right. But the technology, it's essentially a database and an indexable database of stuff. Well, who else does that? Well, Google does that really well. But the nature of the web is just to be an indexable database of stuff. And so if you like pull that back, if you say that that's not super valuable, then what else do? They process credit cards, right? That's really what they do. They help you find something, and then they process your credit card, and then they deliver it. And that delivery thing is huge. But with electronic media, and I know the Kindle, they usurped everybody, and they're giving Kindles away at cost.
Right.
But there's not a boatload of value in the Kindle. It's just a viewing mechanism. And as soon as, I think EPUBs and just the nature of the web, as soon as you remove that distribution difficulty, Amazon doesn't have a boatload of value. And I think individual authors or individual publishing houses that can sell books directly from their website will be incredibly valuable. And when that happens, the real value will be on the book and the editor, like the book and the editor, like the writing and the editorial will be where the value is. And once distribution isn't a difficult thing, which Amazon knows, they know that their original value is all distribution, and that's why they are working so hard to like get the Kindle in every mother, father, and child's hand on the universe. But once that shakes out, and I'm not saying it's going to be simple to get rid of them, but
right,
I think they've got some work cut out for them.
That's a very, very thorough assessment. I think there's one last thing I want to ask, and then we'll move kind of into Submittable. For people writing a book right now, what one piece of advice would you give them? What is the most helpful thing that you can tell them?
Well, I know that my writing, the amount of the volume of my writing dramatically stopped when I stopped writing every day. So when I used to write I'd write before work from 5 to 8 every morning, and that was just how it got done. And now that I don't do that every day, I sort of stress out about work or the startup, and I used to easily kick out 100 pages a month, and now just get your butt in the chair and stay there. Just make sure you show up every day. It's similar with startups. Like everyone thinks a book is about an idea, and it just isn't. It's about like getting words on the page, and those words starting to like talk back to you, and characters sort of standing up out of those pages and wanting to be in a book. And then the book sort of, as long as you're getting words on the page, a book will start to shape, start to happen.
It's not about an idea, it's about execution.
Exactly. Sound familiar? And it's the same. It's the exact same thing with startups, right? Like, so you write a book, and then everybody, like, you sort of run into younger people and or people who haven't, people who haven't done it, and they all got an idea. Oh, I've got an idea for a book, and it's the same thing, with a startup. Now that we have a company, if I run into strangers, a lot of people say, "Oh, I've got a billion dollar idea for a startup." And, obviously, that's just the smallest piece of 1% of making a company. So yeah, keep your butt in the chair.
All right, so let's talk about a little bit about Submittable. So it actually started out as a social network. Today, it's a kind of submission application document management tool. How did it go from being a social network to what it is today?
Okay, so when we started the company, we had no idea what we were doing, and we thought my partner Bruce and I. So there's three of us: my partner Bruce Tribenzy, John Brownell, and myself. And Bruce and I were working together for a day job, and during lunch, we would go out and we would kind of complain about our boss, and like everybody does. And I was doing a lot of consulting work, and I was doing consulting work for Microsoft, and it just started drying up. It was the fall of 2008, and things just changed really quickly. And one of us said we should start a company. So we went out to lunch and we made a list of things that sucked, that we didn't like. And we quickly just, listed like 10 things. And one of the things as a writer that sucked was trying to send out stories to different magazines. And my initial idea was I would create a social network where everybody was either a writer or a publisher, and writers could go put in metadata, search by that, find organizations that were looking for particular pieces, and we were going to do the concentric circle things. Then we'd move into art, then we'd move into music, and we'd just be this creator, publisher, social network. So we called that Submishmash. And that was the first idea, was a social network around the process of creation and publishing. And we just started writing code. And we didn't really think about it too much. We literally decided that at lunch. We hadn't talked about it past that. And I was saying the submission process sucked. And Bruce said, it's a submishmash. And I said, yeah, that's great. Let's go see if the URL is available. And so we named the company, the original company was called Submishmash. We named the company after a thing we thought sucked. So it would, it'd be like naming shoes after the sound you make when you step in dog crap, right? Like instead of shoes, it's like, ah. Okay. So we just started writing code on the weekends and at night, and we worked for like 9 months, and we built this social network around the publishing process. And we didn't have any clients, but we had fake users and fake publishers, and it all worked, and it looked great. And Bruce was a developer at Borland and Oracle, and is a fairly serious individual. And so we didn't know what to do. We had no idea what to do next. We had no idea how to launch it. We had no idea how to make money. We had no idea. We just thought you'd build it. We'd put it up and just start counting money. But so obviously that didn't work, or it didn't happen. And during the process, actually the very first version that we built was kind of crap. Bruce and I are pretty competent developers, but Bruce is really like a C++ guy, and he can work in hardware. He's also a pretty accomplished cinematographer, but it worked, but it didn't look great. And we had worked with this guy John Brownell, who we knew was a better developer than us. And we were like, maybe we should ask John to take a look at it. So we invited John to take a look at it. And he's like, what are you guys doing? He had no idea we were trying to build this company. He's like, let me play with it for a couple of days. I see a couple problems. So we gave it to him, and over the weekend, he came back on Monday, and he had like rewritten everything, and it just looked amazing. And it was still this crazy, dumb social network that didn't work, but it looked awesome. And we were like, okay, we need you to work with us, So that was how the original team started. We still didn't know how to make money, still didn't know how to do anything. And then we went to launch it, and the problem with a social network, or it's more like a marketplace, right? It's more like a publisher, writer marketplace,
right?
Is that you have the chicken and the egg problem that you'll always have, which is, what do you get first? Do you get the writers, or do you get the publishers? And we didn't have a solution. Like, I think 37 Signals had a marketplace for maybe their job board. What was it called?
They do have a job board. They built a bunch of kind of small tools earlier. They've started to, I think a lot of them are now features in Basecamp. They had a to-do list called to-do list.
Yeah. But they had a marketplace. Maybe it was the job board, but I know that one didn't really work out as well. And the problem is that you have two different customers. It's incredibly hard to create marketplaces because you need to get the publishers before you get the writers, or it won't work. So 9 months go by, we built this thing, and we're saying, okay, we're going to launch December 9th. We have no idea what that means. We just are going to turn it on.
Flip the switch.
We don't have any customers. We have no connection to the media. We live in Montana. And we're going to launch on December 9th, 2009. And I was in bed that Saturday. And by now I had sort of become the CEO because Bruce is a filmmaker, John is a musician, and we knew we'd eventually get into those verticals, but we knew the first one was writing. And so I became sort of the CEO because I had connections with publishing and writing. And so I'm sitting in bed just realizing I don't know what to do. I have no idea what I'm going to do on Monday. And we don't have any money. I've quit my job. I've got 2 kids. And I know, we'd raised $20,000. But by mistake. Basically, someone just came up to us and said, listen, I feel like somebody who knew what they were doing, these guys, Glenn and Steve, they'd seen that we'd built this thing. They saw that we'd done 9 months of work. And they were like, here's some money. So let's just do this. So they gave us enough money to basically hang ourselves. So we went and quit our jobs with $20,000. I mean, looking back, I can't explain it, but it seemed perfectly sane when we were doing it. And I had started talking to customers. I'd started calling publishers. Like, I would call Esquire, I would call like big publishers, and I'd be like, yeah, we've got this thing. It's called Submishmash. They'd be like, Submish, what? Who are you? Why? And I was like, yeah, I'm in Montana. Like, just insane. And some of them, the ones that would look at it, they would say, yeah, do not list my name anywhere on this. Do not include us. We are not part of this. But the ones that did look at it, we'd put this voting mechanism, the ability for a document to come into a publisher and vote on it and comment on it. So it was just a commenting system.
Right.
And it would also take a Word document and it would create a PDF version of that so that it could be seen in the browser. We hadn't realized how powerful that was. But because previously they would get a document via email and they'd have to open it in Word, and they couldn't do this. This is like iPads were just starting to show up, phones.
Right.
So they would get these documents, they couldn't do it. So they were like, yeah, do not include me in this at all. But that little piece where the document opens and votes, like I'd be interested in that. That's cool. And so 2 days before we were going to launch, I I just had in my head, I just said, let's just create a software as a service. And it suddenly became utterly clear. We'll just sell it. We'll sell it to publishers. And we'll give them, any publisher, the ability to accept and curate any document. And we quickly scrapped 90% of the code, just cut out that little piece, built the software as a service, and we had our first customer probably by January, so a month later. I think we maybe had free users. We got our first dollar in like March.
And how did you find your next customers after that?
I would just call and email publishers. I would call 100 publishers a day, and
just pick up the phone. Oh yeah, because you said earlier they'd see that you were from Montana. That's your competitive advantage.
Well, I was also a published author, so I'd send an email, and my Radiant Days was published by like an amazing publisher, Counterpoint Press, which was started by Jack Schumacher, and he's a luminary in the publishing world. So I had street cred with publishers, so they would take the call. They were a little like, whatever, dude, but for the most part, I could get in front of them, and yeah. And it was a problem. They really had this problem. They had no way of dealing with manuscripts that came in.
And you guys solved it.
And we solved it.
So I guess publishers are really these are businesses. Most startups you see out, at least that the media is focused around are consumer startups. Mm-hmm. What do you think are the specific challenges of starting a business to business company?
You need to understand that vertical. You need to have business. This is the problem, like why it's difficult for 20-year-olds to start business companies, is that they don't have business experience. I had 15 years of writing and publishing under my belt before I did this. So I knew the pain points. And as a writer, that was, when I said it was sort of a harrowing experience once the book's out, there's all this undignified crap that I knew existed. Like, you write with this very romantic idea, right? Like, just you and your genius pouring it onto the page.
Right.
And you think like that's the idea of the writer. But then there's like this undignified stuff where you're begging people to review it, and you got to like send out review copies, and your friends are asking for free versions and, or free copies of the book. And everyone thinks you're way more successful. Everyone thinks like every writer is suddenly a millionaire. Or
you're set.
Yeah. When in fact you're like twice as screwed, because you've now like engaged in this career that doesn't really pay, and you've got to you either got to teach, or it's just it's just not a super fun process. It's publishing a book was the most, it was like a dream realized. I'm not saying it's not a great fun thing to do, but it's not quite as sexy as it sounds. And there's all this accounting. You've got to like send receipts to your publishers. There's all this like sort of wonky stuff that you don't think of Hemingway doing, whatever.
The less glamorous side of publishing.
That's right. So I knew that there were these wonky bits, and that they were unsexy. And if they're unsexy, then no one's really focusing on them. So that's like, that's what's pretty obvious to me now, that there's huge opportunities in just sort of weird, unsexy industries. One of the things I see with young entrepreneurs in Missoula is they like come up to you with like some big crazy social network, or exactly like what we did, right? When the real opportunity for tech in Montana is that we've got tourism, agriculture, lumber, mining. We have these massive industries that are just ancient, and there's so much opportunity. Like, if I start another company, I'm just going to look at the native industries in Montana and figure out how to do the 2.0 version, right? Like billion dollar industries. And I think like that's hard for Silicon Valley to really gather or understand. There's just Well, I mean, Silicon Valley focuses on ride shares because driving sucks in California, right? Like that
Right.
would never occur to a Montanan. It's actually like driving is awesome here. Like we get in a car and go straight for 200 miles, surrounded by crazy scenery.
Yeah.
Uh, you could drink and drive until a couple of years ago, and you could also there was no speed limit until like 2004. You could literally the speed sign said reasonable and prudent. You could just go as fast as you felt was reasonable and prudent.
Wow.
Um,
I've
so
I've got to take a moment to segue. We're talking about other unsexy industries. You guys actually have another tool, I believe, called Talented, which
yeah,
is kind of a uses. I assume uses kind of the same software, but it's kind of specifically like a resume job application manager.
yeah, it's a application management system for small to medium sized businesses. We have a boatload of restaurants and retail places using it, and that's right. We built it on the same core code set, which is essentially the ability to review any digital object. And it's doing really well, and we the revenue. It's easier to charge for that because businesses actually have money versus publishers who don't. um,
That's an important thing about getting paid. The businesses have to
yeah,
have money.
yeah. So we love that, and we think that's also a huge industry. But it's it's weird that I don't wake up thinking about it. I literally go to sleep and I wake up thinking about Submittable, and I think about my customers, and it's like part of my, it's because I understand that vertical, and I know like that I'm concerned about the future of publishing, and I can talk about the future of publishing. As for the future of HR, just not so much. I shouldn't be saying this, but it's just like that business is not. It's an example of somebody trying to fit some like come up with a solution before they actually knew the or understood the problem. Um, as we're with Submittable, we've moved into film. We now have film festivals using it. We now have producers using it for music, and that's exactly what John and Bruce like natively understand. So yeah.
Don't you kind of find that a little bit? Doesn't that kind of counter your other point? So we were talking about kind of unsexy industries and things like that, and there's this huge opportunity for lumber. Um, do you think for someone who's thinking about starting a business, should they go you know build the lumber industry 2.0, or go after something that they really believe in
Well, no, not believe in and understand the industry,
or understand?
right? Like I think so. You go to these meetups in Missoula, and it's a bunch of geeks who I love. Like it's just all these tech people, right? And they're sitting there like talking about the latest JavaScript, or like doing demos of like whatever the like Node.js, and um, they are just totally geeking out. They're building all this stuff, and it's amazing. Like we have all these super smart, the IQ quotient from Missoula. It's a college town. It's totally off the charts, right? So you've got all these kids building all this stuff, and then they are working for large insurance companies in Minneapolis. Like they're not necessarily startup people. They like to be startup people, or they've all got the skills to do it, but they don't understand how you get from product to marketplace. Um, and then we have these people like these ranchers walking around with crazy knowledge, 4 generations of raising cattle, on the high line. Like, they're them, and like people in Siberia understand how to raise cattle in a place where, on average, like, you have horizontal snow, like you've got, wind chill below 30 for like 2 months straight. They know crazy stuff, right? And they're just walking around with that knowledge. And what if they could like talk to one of these geeks who like happens to like be able to like build, I don't know what, it's just like if you can connect those people, like these people with these freaky niche like skill sets or knowledge bases, with people who can build tools, I think that's really going to be exciting.
That's
I think that's the future in places like Montana. The South probably has the same kind of stuff. Like I think you will build software that's very different than Silicon Valley software. I don't. I don't want to get into like stereotypes, so I have no idea. Seems like a slippery slope. I feel like I can comment on Montana.
Yeah, no, I mean, I mean, in Atlanta, and I've talked about this a million times. Atlanta is interesting because you've got an incredible concentration of Fortune 1000 companies. And so you'll see guys like Adam Wexler, who I interviewed. His company, Insight Pool, builds kind of social media analytics tools for like the Intercontinental Hotel Group, like Holiday Inn. And so you start to see Atlanta has an incredible number of kind of these enterprise startups that cater specifically to these huge companies. They may only have one or two customers, but when you have a customer that's that big, it can make the whole startup.
Yes, we actually, some of our original investors. So we raised a little bit of money in Missoula, but we later went to New York and Birmingham, and so we have some investors in Birmingham, and they are just incredible people, and just like one of them, I heard this hearsay, is that he's a very successful individual, but he works at the hot dog stand at every Auburn game.
That is awesome. that is incredible.
Yeah, right. And these people, like, they, incredibly smart, accomplished dudes who just think about things very differently than the smart, accomplished people in Silicon Valley, and think about industries. Like they were excited that we weren't, some big sexy thing. Like they got it, and they're cool with slow growth. We talk very differently. They're not. There's just a different sensibility, which is, I dig. So yeah.
We're kind of getting short on time here, and I know there's like a million things I want to ask you. I guess kind of the last thing for Submittable is kind of to talk a little bit about your experience at Y Combinator.
Yeah, so it was amazing. I definitely, when I say Silicon Valley wasn't for us, Y Combinator was absolutely one of the best things I've ever done in my life, and dramatically changed our company and changed how I think. Opened us to. It was just like, I guess like the one obvious thing, the one takeaway that when you, at Y Combinator, when you went to the office hours, you met with Paul or Gary Tan or somebody, you would go in there with a problem, and you'd say the problem, and they would immediately be like, okay, let's fix it. Like, okay, you need to talk to this person in New York. Immediately they write the email, and it would just happen. And I think in Missoula, like if I bring a problem to my friends, we sort of like list like, oh yeah, that is a problem. Like we examine the problem instead of thinking of the solution immediately. And there's just this knee-jerk reaction to like get stuff done, which was the most incredibly valuable thing. Like I don't like, if any of my employees, we have 9 employees now. If any of my employees come in with a problem, I'm like, okay, well, we get up and we just fix it right now. It's just sort of like how we work, there's just a velocity that I hadn't engaged in before Y Combinator. And they also just how smart all those people, like the other classmates, how motivated, how driven, really, like we absolutely are going to be like $100 million company. And we might get there in a very different way than we would have if we stayed in Silicon Valley. But being around the people that ambitious makes it seem absolutely obvious that that's where we're going. And I don't know. I think I'd be concerned. I'm like, well, I don't know if I'm $100 million company. I would think about things that didn't actually matter. That I would let myself get in the way if I hadn't gone to Y Combinator, experienced that. I don't know if that makes sense.
I'd like to kind of switch gears and kind of talk a little bit about you, because I think you're a fascinating person. You're an author, you're a developer, you're an entrepreneur. When you're at a bar and you're meeting new people and someone asks you, what do you do? What do you tell them?
Well, I'm a little past the bar age. One, I want to say that calling someone a fascinating person sounds like a euphemism for something.
It's
uh,
not. It's not. It's not.
but I don't know. I love talking about. Now I love entrepreneurialism. I love I basically try to convince everybody I meet they should start a company, which is probably annoying. Um, and I have um, I don't know. I'm probably a little high low. A little manic, or I can rant, I guess. Um, I don't know. I like going to bars. I like meeting new people. I like storytelling. I like hearing people tell stories. I've got two kids now, so I don't really go to bars that much. My kids are pretty amazing. Um, I don't know. I talk about kids. I can talk about parents.
All right, that's fair. It's a tough question. Well, so I guess are you do you consider yourself a goal driven person?
No, I consider myself a show up and do shit person. You know, One thing I didn't like about YC is like it was a lot of like you should do this or this. Even now we have advisors who are like, oh, you've got to be here by November. And at the end of it, goals are helpful, but really, actually, Nick Saban, he said this like 2 weeks ago. This was so crazy. Sorry to bring him up, but
No, go ahead.
um, but he was like, I don't really have a goal. I don't really have a plan. I just like execute every play. Like I don't have a plan, an overarching plan. I just make sure we do stuff. And I cannot believe I'm not actually a football fan. I run with somebody who knows a lot about sports, so
Right.
I have to read up on sports so I can have
Got to make conversation.
yeah. Um, but the um, but I think what's crucial is just showing up and doing what you can do, right? And I think I learned how to write a book that way. Like I said, I didn't know how to like figure out a whole plot structure, or like create. I didn't have like the novel just happened because I showed up every morning exhausted and typed for 2 or 3 hours, and I wouldn't get up until I had a page, and then I would go to work. And the startup happens the same way. Like, we were out of money a number of times. We had no customers. We were total idiots. We had no idea what we were doing. But I would just show up every day and get kicked in the teeth. And the next day I would come back and I get kicked like I wouldn't get kicked as hard, and eventually like people stop kicking you, and eventually people are like hugging you, and eventually, but you just got to show up and do what you can. Like the other thing that bugs me about like Hacker News and all these startup blogs is that there's like this idea that everybody knows and no one knows. Everyone's trying to figure out. There's sort of ways of not getting killed, but mostly you just like people will all get there differently. The thing is, you got to do it. Is the thing you have to do is do it. Like you got to show up every day, and you got to make mistakes, and you just kind of like you just got to make. I mean, how you don't die, and Paul Graham did say this, so I guess there are lessons, but how you succeed is just by not dying. So I think for me, I'm like, God, this sucks. There's definitely days where I do not want to be a CEO or have a startup, or, I just, there's days that aren't great. There's days just full of rejection. And I don't see how we're ever going to get, never mind the $100 million company, but how we're going to get the payroll and all that stuff. And then the next day you show up and something crazy happens. Like, CBS is a customer now, which, if you asked me 2 years ago, like, or 2 weeks ago, so you just got to show up and keep your butt in the chair, try to make stuff that people like. Customer support is really crucial. Be a people person. Start stuff with people you totally, admire and like. The fact that I have founders who, the majority of people on earth would have shot me very early on for getting them into this. But, I've got awesome founders, co-founders. and just show up.
Well, I think that's a great way to end the interview. That's a great chunk of advice.
Yeah.
Michael, where can people follow you? Where can people, how can people reach out to you, give you money?
Yeah.
However, whatever that deal is.
Yeah. So everybody needs a submission management platform. You don't know it yet, but it's going to change your life. No, so publishers, any organizations accepting anything that needs to be reviewed, whether it's resumes, whether it's films, whether it's audio, you can sign up at submittable.com. We're ridiculously affordable. We will save you hundreds of hours. We've told people have told us that it's literally a breath of fresh air once they start using it. You don't need IT, it just happens, it just works. And so it's submittable.com. Anybody can email me directly, which is michael@submittable.com. And we are pretty active on Twitter and Facebook. And so Submittable, Twitter at Submittable. And we also hang out on Bolark, which is that creepy little thing on the bottom. I try to do 1 hour a day just to talk to customers. So if you ever actually really want to talk to me, I'm on that little creepy thing as a CEO. I think that's really valuable. I think that's a great lesson too, that I think the CEOs, especially until you're like more than 20 people, should really talk to customers at least once a day. I think it's incredibly valuable. And yeah.
Well, Michael, thank you for doing the show today.
Oh, Sam, thank you.
All right, everybody, that's our show today. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, I would encourage you to go to signaltower.co and subscribe. Signal Tower is also on Twitter and Facebook. If you have any questions, comments, if you think the show sucked, or if you just want to reach out and say hi, I encourage you to get in touch there. All right, everybody, thanks for watching.